Hello, Atmore. It's the Lloyd and Friends Show. And now here's your host, Lloyd Albritton.
Hello, Atmore. This is Lloyd Albritton. And I'm here today with my special guest, Mr. Phil Johnson. Phil, if you want to say hello, you can chime in.
Good morning, Atmore.
We're here. We're pre-broadcasting from my house, my little antiquated studio here. Hopefully, we can get a pretty good broadcast. We'll hopefully broadcast at 10 on Saturday morning. We're not sure of the start date, but whenever it starts, it continues. We'll have one every Saturday morning with a different, interesting character. Interesting conversations with interesting people. Now, we had the program on a few years ago at the regular radio station, and my wife said, "You going to do this every day?" We did it every day then. Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah. And she said, "Well, is there really that many interesting people in Atmore?" And I said, well, my philosophy is this. Will Rogers used to say that he never met a man he didn't like. And I'll have to say that I never met a man who wasn't interesting. Now, we had a guest in just a little while ago, and he was kind of scared. He said, "I'm really not that interesting, And I said, well, let's just get started and we'll see. And, we did quite a few interviews on the old program, and I never had one that when we finished the hour interview that didn't have a lot more to say once we got warmed up.
Well,
so
had
it's
more
interesting.
Luck than me.
Really?
Yeah. I had one guest one morning on the WEA, the regular station.
Yeah.
And by the time I had given about 8 or 9 questions and gotten just yes and no for the answer, I knew that was a disaster.
Now, I'll take that back. I did have one or two, but for the most part, now that you reminded me, I had one or two. Mm-hmm. But some people, I'll tell you, probably the most interesting guest I had, my buddy Heath Jackson, sheriff. Mm-hmm. Heath ran for sheriff 2 or 3 times, and I supported him all the time. And Grover Smith was a pretty good friend of mine too. So I had Grover and Heath come on the show at different times. Now Heath is a great stumper. I mean, he's a great politician. He can stand up and tell some stories, and so I thought Heath would be a great guest, but he got in front of that microphone and just froze up. But I know I'm going to try to get him back on maybe. But I know he should have been more fun than he was. He was just frozen in front of the microphone.
Well, I guess you warmed him up because when I interviewed him in the last election, he was he was a live wire.
Okay. Well, he usually is. And then I had Grover come over, and now Grover was a pro at it. He'd been, I guess, given so many interviews. So he really did a good job. Well, Heath did. So Heath, in case you hear this, come on back. We'll do it again. Heath did great. He's one of my favorite people. Phil Johnson. Phil, I have long been an admirer of yours.
Well, thank you.
You have done some things over here with the GECA. That just
GECA.
Is that GECA? I call it GECA. That just amazed me. Having tried to do projects of my own through the years, how difficult it is to just bring 2 or 3 people to a meeting, and you got all these people, all volunteers. You don't pay them, do you?
Nope, nobody's paid.
All volunteers, and all volunteers, and just so much talent that most people in Atmore, I don't think, have any idea of how much talent there is here in Atmore, but it doesn't just happen. Somebody has to put all this together. So I want to talk about this. The interview is about you. Okay, so I want to talk some about you, about what an interesting fellow, you really are. But I want part of that is surely going to be this GECA theater. But let's talk about you first. Let's go ahead and do that. Tell me, there's a lot of Johnsons in Atmore. Mm-hmm. So which ones are you kin? I usually say, who's your daddy?
None of them.
Tell us a little bit where you came from.
I came from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Graduated in school in Belmont and Nashville, and then graduated from graduate school in Louisville, and came to Atmore to accept a position as the Minister of Music and Youth at First Baptist Church. After a short stint there, and then another wonderful stint I had over at Brooks Memorial, looked for a way to find a more permanent place in the community. And so that led to me opening up a music school here in town called PS Music. And you want to know where a lot of those early talents came from. It came from that music school, from students that were studying there. When we formed the Greater Escambia Council for the Arts, a lot of the talent base that we used were the students that were studying there. And it wasn't just Atmore. I mean, we had people coming from Monroeville and, Bay Minette and Milton. And still, to this day, we have performers that come from all over the region. The most recent production we had, the concert, all together now, we had, I think it was a total of 34 people performing on that, and of the 34 people, a good half of them are from outside of Atmore. It's just, if you have that right moment, that right connection, then you have something magical happen. And this all happened because while I was, trying to establish PS Music, I was working with the Atmore Arts Council. And Jerry Janes and I, another
Now,
good.
what was PSM? Was it like a school?
That's my music school.
It's a school. Okay, it wasn't a retail store.
It was a retail store
It was
also.
retail store. You got to make a living somehow.
Yeah, you got to make a living somehow.
Yeah.
We did pretty good. We had 88 students that studied with us at one time there.
Wow, that's a lot.
It was.
Where was this located?
It was, where John James's insurance agency is now.
Yeah.
It was the other half of that building.
Oh, okay.
And we had established there. And while
And this was what time period?
this was it was about 28, about 27, 28 years ago.
Time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Well, I'm getting old. But, Jerry Janes and I, who one of my good friends was, we were working with the Atmore Arts Council, and the Atmore Arts Council was gearing more toward beauty pageants. Well, we didn't have any great love of beauty pageants. We didn't particularly want to do beauty pageants. So we just decided to produce a show on our own, basically independent of the Arts Council. It was a production of Sound of Music. And we knew when we had made that production that we had caught fire. We had seen something truly unique happen. The people in that production did not want to see it end. They did not want to see the organization end. And we looked at it and we saw we had one of two options. Either we could basically stage a coup in the Atmore Arts Council and take over, which neither of us wanted to do that, or we could just form a new organization. And that's where GECA has come from that group of people. There's a lot of people who the first show they ever did in their life was that Sound of Music, and they're still working with GECA 21 years later.
Wow.
So
were the McGinty's one of those?
Yes.
They must love it because they're
McGinty's, the Polsons.
Yes, Sharon. I went to school with Sharon.
Yeah, and Mary Beachy was one of our original nuns in the Sound of Music, and a lot of the kids that were involved. I guess the reason I don't like to talk about me so much as like to talk about the organization is because what we've been able to accomplish there, people don't see it, but we've had 25 young people from this town and the surrounding area whose only training in the arts was with the Greater Escambia Center for the Arts. And they've gone on to receive college scholarships, to graduate, to work professionally in New York and London. We have stars that have come from here that had GECA never existed, no one would have ever heard of them. Wow. They would have never been exposed. And so to me, that's the great thing. It's not anything I did. It's this wonderful team that came out of that first show and the wonderful people that have stuck with us all along. Jerry's been with us every step of the way. He had to move to Miami for a few years on a job, but when he came back, he came right back helping us all the way. So, but it's to me, that's the interesting thing. It's not me. I was just one of the cogs that made it start to happen, but it's the organization.
What was the guy's name that started Walmart?
Sam Walton.
Sam Walton. And Sam Walton's biography, somebody asked him about how he built Walmart to be so great. And Sam Walton said, well, if I had any talent at all, it was hiring the right people, because I had so many people along the way that wanted to do this or wanted to do that. And I didn't get it. I was totally against it, but I allowed them to do it, and that's what made Walmart great.
And
Was trusting people to.
great organizations are not one person. I don't care what anybody may want to claim. People like to talk about jobs at Apple. Let's face it, jobs, same thing Walton said. It's having the right people at the right time doing the right job that made that organization work. It's never one person. If it's one person, you're limiting what the organization can do to the time and talents of one person. And if that's what you got, you're never going to have anything impactful. It's always going to be tiny.
When did this happen? When you decided to, after you did The Sound of Music, and
That was in 2000.
That was just in 2000. That's been 21 years ago.
We were formed September the 12th, 2000.
Okay. And the location where you are now, the old Bates Furniture Building, what gave you that idea? How did that come up?
For the first 10 years, we were a road company. Did a lot of our major productions at the high school, but we wound up, we even counted, at one point in time, we had performed 42 shows in 48 different venues, ranging from the back room of coffee houses to college performing arts stadiums or theaters. And it was getting to the point where our audience couldn't find us. That's literally what it was. They knew we were going to have a show, but they couldn't figure out where we were at this time, And some summers were always our big show. Some summers we'd be performing in Flomaton, some in Bruton. We even had one summer where we took the show to Pell City to have a place to perform. And we knew that we couldn't sustain it anymore like that. So we had to find a place. And with the help of John Mascaro, an accountant over in Florida.
I know John.
Yeah, and
Coffee House. Yeah,
yeah, and
he's a great talent.
Some wonderful donors. I especially want to mention Bob McMillan. He's no longer with us, but he was one of the key factors in making sure that we had the financial stability in order to start this process.
I didn't know that. I knew Bob pretty well.
Yeah, and then of course we have one anonymous donor who had given us close to $100,000 to put a roof on the place and rewire it. Let's face it, an old furniture store is not the place you want to put a tech-heavy organization like a theater. The wiring was sunken concrete, and it was old, ungrounded wiring, couldn't hold the loads we were going to put on it. So the roof had been leaking for 5 years while the building had sat empty, and so the place was just a wreck. Bob Jones at United Bank happened to be the head of the bank that had foreclosed on it. So they had the note on the place. And working with him, working with John to get us our nonprofit status, and these donors that wanted to come in and help us, including the people at PCI have helped us a lot through the years. We were able to put all of this together and make it all click, do all the things that we had to do. The first 2 years we had the building, it was virtually useless to us. No heat, no cooling. We tried to have one rehearsal for Beauty and the Beast there, and after about 3 people nearly passed out from heat stroke, we said, no, we got work to do before we use this building. Our first show there was called The Rainmaker, and we had no stage, we had no seats, we had no curtains. We performed the show out in the middle of an open room, and we made some benches for people to sit on. If you've been in there recently, you know it's come a long way.
Well, it's very nice now, yeah.
People, we've had people ask us, where does all the money go y'all take in for these shows? Well, folks, we are the very quintessential definition of non-profit. When we get through with a year, we have spent between $25,000 and $35,000 just keeping the place running and paying for the cost of shows. And considering the fact that our ticket prices are half what every other theater prices are in this area, no, we don't make any money.
Which is like $10? $15. $15, yeah, okay.
The cheapest one besides for us, I think that for matinees, Pensacola Little Theater charges $25. So everybody else is well above our prices in that area. But
there's nothing second rate about your shows.
No,
I'll tell you that. I'm not a pro at it, but
We're not you're not coming to see your average high school production when you
Right.
come to GECA. We've had a philosophy all along. 3 points to our philosophy. One, we're going to give the best show we possibly can give, which means technical in every aspect, music and dance and everything that we do. It's going to be the very best we can do. Now, we have limits. You're never going to see Cats performed on the GECA stage. We did Beauty and the Beast, which is an extremely expensive show, but we did that at the high school where we had 900 seats for it. Cost us $10,000 to put that show on. In the theater we're at now, which has 130 seats, you can imagine what ticket prices would have to be to cover a $10,000 show. We can't do it, and there's shows that we're limited to. But
what are the factors that decide what a show's going to cost? Just give me an idea.
The biggest factor is royalty.
Royalties.
Yeah. If you're doing a Disney show, you better sit back and
Get ready to
hold
pay
on
it.
to your seat, because they're going to charge you upwards of $3,000 for every show you do. And I don't mean for a run. I mean for a show.
Every show.
Yeah.
Wow.
Disney is real proud of their properties. And if you try to get around by cheating, like some schools in the area will photocopy things off the internet and what have you, Disney catches you, they'll go after you for $50,000 for every show you put on. So you don't do that.
That's really interesting. I guess if you did a little mental check, you'd realize that it costs royalties to do these shows, but it's not the first thing most people would think about.
No.
In my thoughts, how much is it? Are the lights brighter in one show than another, or where would that
royalties
come?
are the big
The royalties are the big deal.
Yeah. Then, there is an expense. When we have a show month, when we're putting on a show for a couple of weeks, it's not unusual for our power bill to be $1,000 that month.
Wow.
Because of how much it costs. That light bar above the audience that shines on the stage, well, it's 100,000 watts of light that's shining. You run that for any length of time, and your electric meter's spinning like a helicopter. That's expensive. The insurance has gone insane. We pay $3,000 a year just for protection against terrorism, and we know nobody's going to bomb our theater, but the insurance has to be purchased in order to protect the lien holder who has the mortgage on the building. So you have to buy it. That and water utilities and just general props you have to buy for a show. Think about the wood that goes into a show. When we build a set, we're building something to last 8 weeks. Okay, which means every time we build a set, most of that wood's going to have to be replaced, because by the time you split it, by the time it's gotten torn up, being put apart and taken apart, most of it's not usable.
Now, who does all this?
We do it.
You do it yourself. You don't have carpenters come in.
Oh, no.
So you learn about more than acting, don't you?
Yeah.
Learn how to do some carpentry.
Everybody who's ever worked in our shows at any length of time has probably learned the technical aspects of running the lighting, running the sound, rigging the lighting and the sound, how to build set pieces, how to make things look realistic. Because, folks, if we're going to build a balcony for Daddy Warbucks' house and Annie, we can't afford to put a 2x6 structure framed balcony up there. One thing, it's too heavy and we have to be able to move it. And the other thing, we can't afford the materials. So what we have to do is learn construction techniques with 2x4s that we can create safe pieces, but pieces that can be rolled around on wheels and taken apart and moved. And so a lot of it is learning a different type of construction. We could bring in carpenters from the professional world, and they would take one look at what we're building, and they would throw their hands in the air and walk out the door. I even know one who's a parent of several of our performers who helped with the set building one time, and he saw people reusing screws, and he said, "That's it, I'm no more." But you do what you got to do.
Yeah.
It's just part of the process. Everyone involved has learned how to make do. We costume ourselves. We don't costume the cast. We offer instructions. We tell them what we want them to look like, but everybody who's in a GECA
Comes
show
up with their own costume.
comes up with their own
No
costume.
kidding.
Yeah. If it has to match, like we had to have nuns that matched in this recent production of Sound and Music, then what we will do is go out and purchase all that we have to have and then split the cost between the people who are going to wear them. And then at the end of the run of the show, they have the choice. They can either take it home, it's theirs, they bought it, or they can donate it to the theater and we'll have it next time we need it. We've got a costume closet that's got some real unusual things in it. We've got ball gowns from the 1920s
Wow.
in there.
You're building quite a wardrobe, just like the movie sets.
Yeah.
Building a huge wardrobe.
But we only have limited amount of space, so once we run out of space, we got to discard it and start over again. I would love to have, a good 400 or 500 square feet for costuming, but what we have is about 80 square feet for costuming. So when the racks are full, the racks are full.
So many people in some of these shows. It's hard to get people even to come to work when you're paying them a paycheck.
Yeah.
How do you get them to show up?
They got to love it.
They got to love it.
They've got to, because we put so many demands on them, and we try to be careful with those demands. The things that we need to have them at rehearsals. We need to have them learning their parts. We try to make sure that not a minute of their time is wasted when we have them. So I don't call people for a rehearsal for 3 hours if I'm only going to need them for 15 minutes. So when I put together a rehearsal, I put together a group of people I'm going to have at that rehearsal and figure out what parts of the show we're going to rehearse that night, because these people do it. And then if I need another group of people, I have another rehearsal, another night with that group and rehearse it. One complaint I've consistently gotten from people is they never know what the show's going to be until we get to show week, because I have it put together like pieces. And it's in my head, but they've never seen it together. And then in show week, we rehearse every night. We put all the pieces together. And for the first time, they get to see what it is they've been working on. And a lot of times they didn't know. They knew what the show was, and they knew what their part was.
Kind of like watching the final cut of a movie.
Right. And Titanic is one, for example. There was 135 parts in Titanic. 135 people to juggle their schedules with on that. And to beat all, the week before we came up with that show, we had a hurricane. And we were doing it at the high school, and it had lifted the roof of the high school theater off. And when we came to see our set, we literally had a Titanic sunk in water. The orchestra pit was full. Everything was soaking wet. We saw no way we were going to get to do it. We had 4 days between that hurricane and our opening night. It just so happened, though, that we had a wonderful, wonderful principal over at the high school at that time. And he had a crew in from the county board of education that day. I mean, the minute the hurricane was gone. And by the next day, that roof was replaced and it dried out. And we were able to put that show on. We were scared to death, though, I can tell you that, because we had sunk, that was a show that was about $6,000, and we'd sunk $6,000 into that show. And you can imagine what would happen. They're not going to give you your money back if you don't do the show. And you buy a date when you buy royalties for a show. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do it on that date, too bad. You can't put it off a week.
As part of the royalty, you have to tell them what day you're going to put it on.
And it's because you're getting a protected zone. When we buy royalties for a show, for whatever week or 2 weeks we're going to put that show on, nobody within a 50-mile radius of us can do that show. So it's our time. And if we have to delay, we're going into somebody else's time, and we can't do it.
Wow.
The only time they've ever let us delay was when we had to shut down Sound and Music in mid-production because of COVID cases in the cast. And in that particular instance, the reason they were willing to do it is because most theaters had already gone bankrupt, and they didn't have any other scheduled shows. 70% of all community theaters in the United States went bankrupt in 2020 and 2021. We were very fortunate to be one of the few that survived. And I will say this, if it had not been for Bob Jones and United Bank, if it had not been for the Porch Creek Indians, if it had not been for Southernwood Specialties and Dietrich Bondurant, if it had not been for these community-minded people who wanted and saw the need for us to exist, we would have gone with the rest of them. But they kept us going. And once again, it's not me. I'm not the interesting thing. It's this organization that has just organically sprung around me that I think is the interesting thing.
Now, you said you grew up in Nashville. Is that correct?
Right outside of Nashville.
Outside of Nashville. So, a music town. Mm-hmm. When did you become musical? Were you born that way, or did you? Or how did you get so much talent in knowing how to do all that? I can't even imagine how you put all this together.
Strangely enough, it was my church.
Church, okay.
I went to a church in downtown Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that had a drama ministry, a puppet ministry, an instrumental music ministry, and choir ministry, all for kids and teenagers that, listen, almost 4 nights a week I was at that church at some sort of training grounds. And the people that were directing these ministries, who were leading us, were highly trained professionals from the Nashville area. And so we were getting the kind of training as kids that most people wouldn't have got until they got to graduate school. We were introducing new showpieces, church showpieces that nobody else had ever seen before. Bright New Wings, one of the classics of 60s and 70s Christian programs. Mm-hmm. We were the first church to ever perform that. They did their test run there. Celebrate Life, we were one of the first groups to do that, and that's another huge religious thing. Well, I was exposed to all these things, and then was lucky enough to go to a magnet high school. That was a magnet high school at the time. It was mainly for mathematics and the fine arts and performing arts, and was able to study drama, music there, and get a pretty good background. And then I was able to go to Belmont, and that was a true blessing. Don't know if you know anything about Belmont, but it's probably the hidden gem in the South. People around here recognize colleges for their football teams. Belmont doesn't have a football team.
Where's Belmont?
It's in downtown Nashville.
Okay.
It's on Music Row. If you want to see the instrumental music program, you can watch a Vanderbilt football game, because Vanderbilt doesn't have a music program. That's all Belmont students that go over there and pay for.
Okay.
But it's one of the top 5 music schools in the world, along with Westminster and Juilliard and some of the others. And the professors all came from Westminster or Juilliard or Oxford, and had a marvelous experience there. Wish to goodness I could have sent my kids there, but by the time they were old enough for college, the tuition there was $50,000 a semester, and that was never going to happen. You know, small town pastors don't make $50,000 a semester tuition payments. But I got excellent training there. Went to Southern Seminary in Louisville for my graduate school. Was lucky there because most of the classes in the music department were taught using the textbooks that my professors at Belmont had written. So I was able to test out of most of the music classes in my graduate studies, and I was able to study whatever I wanted to. So I took classes in television production, classes in live stage production, in lighting and sound, and vocal pedagogy, learning to teach voice. I took classes in brass and woodwinds and percussion, keyboard, and everything else, because I basically was getting a master's degree by just getting enough hours, because I had already clept out of the required classes. Mm-hmm. So I just had a lucky time. It wasn't anything I did. It was just
what about this nature versus nurture argument? Were your parents musically inclined at all?
My dad still thinks he can sing, but
he thinks he can.
My mom sang alto and choir. She took piano lessons for 20 years, and God bless her soul, she loved it so much, but she couldn't play worth a lick.
Well, my wife takes piano lessons from your wife.
Right.
And she just thinks she's wonderful. And every day she says, maybe I should just not do this. I mean, I'm 73 years old. I'm never going to be as good as the lady at church or whatever. I said, well, if you're enjoying it,
Yeah,
just
do it.
do it. I mean, I can't play like she can play. I mean, it sounds like a tune to me. I recognize it, but you don't really have to be a star, I guess.
No, just
I wish I had more interest in music when I was younger. Now I went to a southern little small high school where playing football was, everything. And I thought band guys were sissies, I didn't participate in any of that, and that's one of the greatest regrets of my life. Even though I would have never been any good, but I would just wish I knew more about music now.
my high school. Nobody came at the beginning of the football game because they weren't going to win. They knew it right from the kickoff. Yeah. But when halftime rolled around, the stands were packed.
I want to see that halftime show.
Yeah, because we had a 200 instrument band that hosted the national championship every year. So, they came for the band, not for the football game.
Well, yeah, I imagine they just had a lot. I've been on vacation a time or two in Nashville, and I tell people, you find guitar players on the street corners with a cup that are professional. I mean, you just can't believe it.
Hey, listen,
there's so much talent in that town.
I made a lot of spending money while I was at Belmont, putting a glass on top of a piano at the Opryland Hotel and just sitting out there in the lobby and playing. And people would drop money in the cup. You say, well, why don't you work a regular job? The minimum wage at that time was about $4 an hour. I could work an 8-hour shift and make $32. Or I could play the piano out there for 2 hours and get $100 in the cup. Well, which would you do?
Well, I'd love to have enough talent that somebody would drop a quarter in a cup.
Yeah, that's the beauty of being in a town.
Now,
like
what
Nashville.
instruments do you play?
Main instrument now is probably the piano, bass guitar. I don't play the guitar much anymore. I've got arthritis in my fingers, and they don't move as fine as they used to. That's why I changed over to bass guitar. In band, I was trumpet and trombone and baritone. Belmont required us to give recitals on 17 instruments, and so a lot of instruments I learned to do that recital. The violin, viola, cello, things like that. But as far as picking them up since then, I really haven't. Yeah.
Now, your wife, you told me she's kind of retired from doing the music, but I know she's a wonderful pianist and she plays. We don't see her on the stage, but we know that's her over there playing that piano.
Well, she's retired from that too. She's got hip problems, and if there's anything that's difficult on a pianist, even more than if something goes wrong with your fingers, it's your hips, because you're sitting on that hard bench for hours to play. And it was getting to the point where she'd finished playing a show and she couldn't even stand up.
Wow, who would have thunk that? I would have never thought about that.
So she retired, and she sits back. She still plays for our morning worship services over at Robinsonville. And, someday, unless she decides she's going to have hip replacement someday, that's probably going to have to go by the wayside. I think she's getting to the point now where she's going to realize that hip replacements are going to have to happen. She has no cartilage in one of her hips. It's bone on bone.
Wow.
And so,
well, I had back surgery recently, so I understand when that starts to happen. I was over at Walmart today, and I told my wife, I nudged her and said, look at all the people our age that are limping around here. Our bones are just wearing out at our age. Now, Phil, it sounds like more than a full-time job you're doing here. Tell me about how, I know you could probably go out and play the piano and put a cup. Probably wouldn't make that much in Atmore. But but how do you make a living? Well, tell us
I'm
what
the pastor at Robinsonville Baptist Church.
Okay.
And
now, are you a regular pastor,
Yeah.
or are you a music? Not
well, I'm both.
You both.
For 25 years, I was the associate pastor and the music director, and then the last pastor left, and I just felt a calling, and I submitted my resume with the other resumes they had, and they chose to call me as the pastor out there. Been out there for 28 years. Love the church. I tell you what, it is a wonderful, wonderful church, wonderful group of people. It's a small church, but it's a church that loves each other, loves anybody that comes in. We still have many visitors every Sunday, out there. This Sunday we're having a concert with Stephanie Levins. I don't know if you know Stephanie or not, but
I think so.
she's a quadriplegic, but she's a beautiful singer, wonderful singer, has been performing in the area, well, really all throughout the Southeast for a number of years, but she's coming to give a Christmas concert on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock out at the church. But, anybody is always welcome out at
Now,
Robinson
were your
Hill.
studies in school more toward the ministry, or was it more toward music?
When I graduated from Southern, I graduated with a degree that's called Master of Church Music and Divinity.
I see. Okay.
So I had both a divinity degree and a church music degree.
I see.
At the time, I did it with no intention whatsoever of ever being a preacher anywhere. I just felt like I could be a more effective minister if I had that divinity degree, if I had studied the Greek and Hebrew text, if I had taken classes of homiletics and apologetics and all the other things that you have to take with that. And so I took those classes, never realizing that someday God was going to say, okay, you took them, now we're going to use them. And in adding to that, I've been able to work with some of the finest preachers throughout my entire ministry career after graduate school has been here in Atmore. I left for a short period of time, 9 months, to go to a church in Pulaski, Tennessee. I learned very quickly that move was made not at God's direction, because I found myself at the home church of the Ku Klux Klan.
Really?
And I couldn't get out quick enough. Came back here. But I have worked with DeWitt Allen, who was an outstanding preacher. Worked with Jerry Keys, who was an outstanding preacher and minister. He's truly a heart for ministry. And so I was able to learn on a practical scale from these gentlemen, as well as some of the many others that I've had the privilege to work with. I had 5 other pastors out at Robinsonville I've worked with before I wound up being the pastor out there. So I've been blessed out there. And they've been patient with me and helped me through rough times, and never have been, you hear about churches that demand more of a minister than a minister could possibly ever give. Mm-hmm. They've never been that. They've always been good to me and my family.
Now, your primary occupation has most of your life been, since you got your degree in divinity, mm-hmm. That's been your primary occupation. Because I know you've done some other things. I know you taught some classes at the community college in the past.
There was a time when I was raising my kids, and those bills that come in you have when you have teenage kids,
right.
There was no way to making what I was making.
I hear you.
So at one time I had 4 jobs. I was working for the newspaper, writing for Atmore News.
Okay, I remember that.
I was teaching at the college. In fact, taught out there for 29 years. I was, and still do, I tune pianos mm-hmm. when people need to have a piano worked on and tuned. And then I have always been a minister somewhere, part-time, full-time, always been a minister. But that's how I've kept the bills paid, by doing the things that God told me to do and doing them the way He told me to do them. I've had former classmates and friends say, well, you could have been this and this and this. And every time they say that, well, why? Why would I want to do that? I love this town. I love these people. I don't want to go to Birmingham or Atlanta or, I had an interview in Jacksonville. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be just a little cog in a lost ocean there. I think I can make a difference, and that's important. God uses me here.
Well, I think you are making a difference. I'm thinking as you're talking about the story of my life, it was mostly about doing what I wanted to do. I think that's why I never amounted to anything. But I think as we get older, we kind of a lot of us wish that we had followed God's direction more, than following our own, which is often the wrong way.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you've lived a lifetime of doing precisely that.
I've been lucky. I've been blessed. He's never left me wondering what He wants me to do. The one mistake I can say I made in that direction was when I accepted the church in Pulaski, Tennessee, only to discover what I discovered. I mean, the organist, they had a professional organist who was paid to be there every week, but she only showed up about half the time. And I said, what are we going to do about this? And I was told, you can't do anything about it. Her husband's a Grand Dragon. You won't survive the week.
Really?
But I was glad 6 months after I got out of there, that man, that Grand Dragon, was killed by his son with a chainsaw. So they were telling the truth.
Holy cow!
So I'm glad I got out of
So
there.
this is not a figure of speech you're talking here.
No, I'm talking about the real thing.
Are there still a lot of Klan in Tennessee?
In the rural, very isolated rural areas. Yeah, and this, at that time, I understand Pulaski's been built up quite a bit since then, because this was, a number of years ago. This was 30 years ago. But it was all remote access. It was only 2 roads in and out of town. People inside town didn't talk to you or tell you anything unless you became part of the in group, and it didn't take me too long to realize that I had to get out of there. Funny thing was, we had 3 people on staff there: a pastor, an education minister, and I took care of the senior adults and music. And all 3 of us left within that same 6-month period. I'm the only one that stayed in the ministry, so I would love sometime to talk to those guys.
How long did you hang in there with that?
I was there 9 months. And the only reason I made it that long was because my wife was still down here. We still had our house down here, and I was commuting from here to Pulaski and back 4 days a week.
I see. Your family wasn't with you then.
They weren't with me, and so...
that makes it extra tough.
But I was only there Thursday through Sunday, and I was down here Monday through
Wednesday.
Thursday morning. Yeah. And so I wasn't constantly in that. I probably wouldn't have made it 9 months down there or up there if I'd been there all the time.
Your family. Tell me about your family. You have how many children?
I have 2.
2?
My daughter Ellen, my son is Daniel. Daniel just recently got engaged to his longtime girlfriend over in Georgia, and he is a minister of music in a church outside of Rome, Georgia, as well as working.
How old is he?
He is 26 now, 26 years old, just turned 26.
And married, I assume?
No, just engaged.
Okay. Oh, you just told me that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
just engaged, and is in the process now of fixing up a house he bought and getting it ready so that they can get married and move into a place that's ready for them. Ellen's still here in town. She runs a couple of businesses, one where she's teaching voice students, and another where it's called Magical Meetings, where she goes out as different characters, and she and her husband go out in different characters and entertain at business events, parties, kids' parties, whatever. And just, it's being real successful. And it's
Really?
working well.
That's
for
quite
her.
a niche business.
Yeah.
Who'd have thunk it?
Well, she was living in Raleigh and was working for a company like that, and then moved back down here and discovered that there was nothing like that around here. And she thought, well, that could work. And she's made it work.
Wow.
She has made it work.
Wow. I'd love to see one of those. Maybe next time, my next birthday. Is it children or just any birthday?
Anybody. You can
And what do? You just ask for a certain theme, or
they tell what character they want to have show up at their child's party, and they show up.
Really?
Yeah. There's going to be a couple of those characters at an open house we're having at the GECA on Saturday. Elsa and Anna from Frozen are going to be there.
Oh, okay.
And so if the kids want to come by and meet and see Elsa and Anna, they'll be there from 3 to 5.
That ought to be popular. I know my little granddaughter used to. What was that song? I know it was one song in that all.
Let It Go.
Let it go. Yeah.
And then Santa Claus is going to be there with Mrs. Claus. And
Who's doing the Santa Claus? Phil Mack.
Santa Claus is real.
Oh, okay.
Don't go on the radio and say he's not.
Okay.
Phil's a real good friend of Santa Claus, but Santa Claus is real.
Okay. Well, anyway, Phil makes a good Santa Claus.
Yes.
Tell me something interesting about the theater. What's the most interesting catastrophe you've ever had over there?
Besides for the Titanic nearly sinking.
Yeah. That was the worst one?
We weren't in that theater yet, so that I can't say that was the worst.
Now, do you direct over there, or does different people direct the shows?
Different people direct. I've done all the musicals up to this point, and it's not because I'm any tremendous talent at musicals. Is nobody wants to take on that headache, because when you direct a musical, you also have to choreograph that musical. You also have to deal with the legalities of getting the royalties to all the songs and making sure you're obeying all the laws involved with that and printing all of the just right. No one wants to have to deal with that. They're willing to direct comedies and plays, but leave musicals for Phil to do.
Well, you've had training in all of that in your early college training. Plus, I'm sure you've learned along the way. Mm-hmm. But choreography, I would have no idea how they do that. You know, I heard a story told by Ron Howard. He's been in the movie business since he was Opie.
Oh yeah.
You know, and somebody said, "Well, you must know everything about movies. I mean, you've been in it your whole life." He said, "Well, not really." He said, "I don't understand music." He said, I don't know how these people come in and put the theme music together, and it's just kind of fits with what you're doing. He said, I have no idea how they do that. I'm just amazed by it.
Well, it's the same thing with choreography.
Too.
You look for music cues. You help them, you train their ears, help them hear certain sounds, and at these certain sounds, this is what you're going to do. And the sequence, you're going to do it at that sound. And when you hear this next sound you're listening for, you're going to do this next sequence, and you memorize the sequence over and over. General rule, to do a 3-minute song, choreography, it takes you 300 hours of preparation. Now, about 150 of that is going to be the choreographer, because he's got to visualize every second of that, what every person is doing. And then you're going to spend probably another 50 hours teaching that vision to the cast. And then the rest of it is just them doing it over and over and over again until finally they get it.
Is memorizing I'm kind of a frustrated, actor.
Well, you've never tried out for anything.
I haven't, because I've lost confidence that I could ever do it. But memorizing lines, I mean, is that tough for most people? I mean, especially the older cast members?
Everybody has their own approach to it. Some of us, as we've aged and realized our mind is not as much of a sponge as it used to be, have become quite adept at hiding things on stage so we can look at it. Jerry and I did The Odd Couple. I guess this has been 20 years ago, so we really can't blame our age. But that's basically a play that's a huge amount of lines that two people have to memorize, Oscar and Felix. Uh-huh. And so what we did is, on the set, we built a kitchen out off of the set where you could see us walking into what looked like a kitchen, and we could turn right or left. Well, nobody knew, but we had the entire script pasted on the walls in that kitchen. And whenever we knew we were about to forget something, we'd go to the kitchen and get a glass, or go to the kitchen and get some popcorn, or go whatever, because we wanted to see. We knew where our lines were, and we wanted to see and help us remember.
Do the lines have to be precise, or do a lot of people ad lib and you let them get away with it?
There is,
because I've heard of movie directors who wouldn't tolerate varying from script.
With live theater, you have some leeway, but the problem is everybody's line cues off the person before them's line. And if they don't get that cue, they can't say their line, because their line is based on what was said to them. So in the middle of a line, maybe you can take some liberty. But when you come to the ending of your line, it better be on point, because that next person is dependent on you giving them the right line so you can...
You mean to kind of trigger their memory?
No, because their line plays off what that line said. Okay. If someone is sitting at a card game and they're playing cards, and someone else is supposed to say, hey, what time is it? And the guy next to him's answer is supposed to be, that's 1 a.m. And the guy doesn't say, what time is it? Then he can't even say his next line.
Wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, and if his next line can't be said, then the guy after him can't say his line, and so everything screeches to a halt.
Ooh.
And so we have, one of the things we've done in the professional approach to it, we don't allow prompters. Some theater companies will have somebody off stage who will holler a line at somebody or whisper a line. We don't allow it. They know going in, escape points. If this scene starts to derail, if something happens, if a line is dropped and you can't pick it up, then you're going to jump to this point. This is your escape point. This is the next essential thing that has to happen. And so you jump to that escape point and go on from there. And we'll have maybe 40 of those built in a play. And our more experienced actors know how to do the jump. So if we have an inexperienced actor who's about to go off the rails, who you can look at their face and see a deer in the headlights, and you know something bad's about to happen.
Like, what would you do then?
Yeah. Then you jump to the next escape point. If you're the experienced actor and you see that about to happen, you jump to that escape point.
Now, tell me how that happens, because I'm not totally getting it.
Okay.
How would that work?
If they're having a conversation about, say it's a murder mystery, and they're having a conversation about the evidence and looking at the evidence and talking about, well, this person was there and that person was there, and you get to one person who's supposed to give something to trigger the next line, and they have no idea what they're supposed to say, then someone else on the set knows what the next key piece is supposed to be, and they put it in there, and then everything flows from that point on.
They're saying the line for the
No,
they're taking the other person's
they're
line?
creating another line that doesn't exist that helps them jump the space to get to that next flow.
So it is a memory a memory trigger.
Oh, they don't know what it's going to be beforehand. They just, the idea in acting is
but it reminds
it triggers everybody
triggers their
else's, yeah.
memory. Yeah.
Yeah, in acting, you've got to become that character. You cannot go up on stage and pretend to be somebody and have anybody in the audience believe you. The basic philosophy there is this: if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. So you become that character, and if something happens and the flow is going to break, then you do whatever that character would do, whatever it may be, to make things start flowing again. And some places it's harder than others. Neil Simon's a nightmare because everything in a Neil Simon's play is all triggered on dialogue. It is all what someone said to someone else. I mean, you look at The Odd Couple, there's a few physical things in it, but it's 99% dialogue between people. Mm-hmm. Same thing is true with Barefoot in the Park or with any of the other things that he wrote. We're doing one of his pieces in the summer called Fools that, what a delightful idea. A play where someone comes to a town and he doesn't understand why everybody in the town is so incredibly stupid. And then he realizes the longer you're in this town, the dumber you get because he's getting dumber. And it is delightful, but it's all based on a misunderstanding of words and what have you. And so it's all driven by dialogue again.
I've always been a movie buff, and I love. Sometimes my brother Philip, he's technically he's always fooled with cameras and stuff. And I said, if we had understood the technology, we thought being in the movies was just acting. No. There's so many other aspects of it. And I said, you could have been a cameraman. You could have been, all kind of opportunities there.
That's actually the easiest acting because you do 2 minutes. And you do that same 2 minutes over and over and over again until you got it right. Then you move to the next 2 minutes. You can't do that in a play. You're running 2.5 hours.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. And I kind of lost my train of thought there. But I've read where some actors like the stage because it's live and you interact with your audience and all that. But it's also a certain edge there if you forget your lines, where a movie, you just shoot it again. Maybe you do 100 takes until you get it right. But you can't do that on the stage.
No, you got one shot.
That's got to be pretty scary.
Oh, but the reward to have an audience out there that's totally into what you're doing, and you can feel that energy. When you're standing on that stage and an audience is into it, you can literally feel physical energy coming from them. We were doing this recent concert we had. We were chosen to be one of the theaters. There was 3,000 theaters around the world chosen to give this simultaneous concert, and we were one of the theaters chosen. And so we were doing this performance, and one night we had an audience. It happened to be high school football night, and so hardly anybody was there. We had maybe 75, 80 people there. But that audience was so ready for entertainment, so ready to be just taken in to what was going on, that at the end of the very first number, we had people standing and cheering. And I tell you what, I told the cast after that show was over with, I said, folks, I'm glad you got to experience tonight because you may never experience it again. What we got tonight was the perfect theater experience. And it wasn't anything we did. It was what that audience brought to us. And it's wonderful. And it's scary, but it was wonderful.
You know, I love stand-up comedy. I lived in New York for a few years, and I always loved stand-up comedy. But up there is where I got a chance to go to clubs and see a lot of the stand-up comedy. And I actually saw some young comedians who would just freeze and run off the stage crying. I mean, you don't see that on TV, but they would just bomb, and that's tough. And I've often thought, you know, I've been public speaking for most of my life, and people say, well, you're a natural. You don't get scared, do you? Of course I do. I've just learned how to cope with it and so forth. But stand-up comedy, that would be when I watch a stand-up comedian, you know, if you're giving a sermon or a speech and you say something funny and people laugh, that doesn't make you a comedian.
No.
You know, you know, you said something funny and people laughed. And you know, I can say funny things occasionally, but to stand up in a comedy club and you're supposed to be funny, that would be like a deer in the headlights. That would just freeze me. I'm afraid it would. Maybe it wouldn't, but that would be my biggest fear. You know, they say people have a greater fear of public speaking than anything, even death.
I've heard that before, but I've never really understood it because I would much rather be in front of a crowd of people than be in front of 3 people.
Well,
because in the crowd,
actually, I feel safer.
Yeah, I do. I feel safer. Yeah,
it's more. Yeah, it feels safer for some reason.
Especially when you got the theater lights on you and you can't see anybody who's out there. You hear them there, but you can't see them.
Yeah. Well, another real benefit of living in New York is I got an opportunity to go and see some Broadway plays and just how, and these people are sort of like with your theater too. They're not making big bucks. These are extremely talented people who go to New York to try to make it, and most of them you'll never see them on a movie screen. Yeah. But you know they do it because they love it, and they are so talented.
And they're also the waiters and waitresses at the lunch shift at every restaurant you go to.
That's exactly right. Yeah, they may have a star name like Richard Gere, and what was that when he was in? I can't remember what it was. It was a musical. You may have a star, you know, to bring the people in, but most of the actors, the chorus line, all that are they're not amateurs, they're professionals, but they're not big names and probably never will be. But,
well, think about it.
But when I see, having compared what you guys are doing, I can tell you what you're doing is great with the resources you have. I have no doubt, Phil, that you could do a New York play if you had the resources.
I would
you
never
know exactly
want to.
how to do it.
I would never want to. Oh, that is a cutthroat industry. That is an industry that everybody knows there's only going to be a limited number of people who are going to be able to call themselves success. And so everybody out there in that performing field wants to tear you down to increase their chances of being the success. Totally different than what we have at GECA. Here, everybody wants everyone to succeed, and nobody has any desire to tear anybody down. And one of the things we try to get through to the kids, because we have so many that think, oh, I made it here. I'm just going to be able to walk on anywhere and be successful. I said, you better love it, folks, because it's a lot harder elsewhere. They don't want you to succeed.
Wow. One can only imagine. Yeah. Well, Phil, it's been interesting.
Okay, I'm glad.
An interesting conversation with an interesting person. You see that? I thank you for coming on the program.
Glad to.
And Phil Johnson, one of my favorite people. We didn't even get into politics. I know you ran for, I think, city council.
There's another huge mistake I made.
So you have made a few.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Well, I'm sure
I'm just talking about with ministry choices, what I said earlier. No.
Right. Well, I know there's a lot more to the Phil Johnson story. And maybe we'll, as we mature here in the program, we can do a revisit.
Anytime.
So thank you for being here. This is Lloyd Albritton with Lloyd and Friends. Interesting. See if I could say that. Interesting. as Ross Perot would say, interesting. Yep. It makes it easier. Interesting conversations with interesting people.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks for listening to the Lloyd and Friends Show with Lloyd Overton.